The forest was alive, but not in the way most would imagine. Its silence was suffocating, its shadows too deep, and its air carried the weight of secrets buried so deeply that even time had failed to erode them. When four friends stood at the edge of this place, laughter and nostalgia masking their nerves, they couldn't have known they were stepping into something older and far darker than any story they'd heard. The forest seemed to watch, its tangled canopy blotting out the setting sun and swallowing the outside world. There were no markers to guide them, only whispers of a trail long forgotten, a path seldom taken. The air grew cooler with each step, the warmth of their excitement slowly giving way to a creeping unease. It was subtle at first, a stillness too perfect, a quiet too profound. The usual cacophony of nature was absent. No birds, no insects, just the rhythmic crunch of their boots on the leaf-strewn path. Then there were the carvings, etched into the bark of ancient trees, symbols worn by time, yet pulsating with something unspoken, as if the forest itself had been branded. The friends joked about their meaning, dismissing them as relics of a forgotten culture or the handiwork of pranksters, but the markings seemed too deliberate, too precise to be random. Every few yards, another carving appeared, as though marking a descent into a place untouched by light or reason. They pressed on, their conversation thinning as the air grew heavier. What had started as an adventure began to feel like an intrusion. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to change. The trail narrowed, twisting unnaturally, and the trees themselves seemed to lean closer, their branches intertwining like bony fingers. It wasn't long before they felt it, the sensation that turned their stomachs and made the hairs on the backs of their necks stand on end. It wasn't a sound, a sight, or even a smell. It was the undeniable feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes following every step they took. Whispers began to thread through the silence, faint and fleeting, too soft to understand but loud enough to stir panic. The forest was no longer just a place. It was something else entirely alive, aware, and unwilling to let them leave. The crisp autumn air bit at their faces as four childhood friends, Ella, Jake, Riley, and Mia, made their way up the winding trail of the Black Hills National Forest in South Dakota. Their laughter echoed through the serene landscape, a sharp contrast to the eerie quiet of the towering pines. This was supposed to be their last big adventure before college, and life inevitably pulled them in different directions. Jake, the unofficial leader of the group, had suggested the hike after discovering a barely marked trail on an old map in the library. According to local legends, the trail led to the abandoned town of Whispering Hollow, a mining settlement that had vanished over a century ago. The legend spoke of miners who disappeared without a trace, leaving only their empty cabins and a chilling silence. Mia hesitated at first. She'd always been the most cautious of the group, but Jake's infectious enthusiasm and Riley's teasing convinced her to come along. "It's just a story," Riley had said with a grin. "Besides, we've got Jake's map. What could go wrong?" As they ventured deeper into the forest, the dense canopy above seemed to swallow the sunlight. The trail was overgrown, the path barely discernible beneath layers of fallen leaves. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to change. The chirping of birds faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed against their ears. Ella, the most observant among them, was the first to notice the carvings on the trees. Strange symbols, worn by time, marked the trunks sporadically along the trail. "Do you think these mean something?" she asked, tracing a finger over one of the carvings. "Probably just old miners marking the trail," Jake replied, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. By the time they reached what they believed to be Whispering Hollow, the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson. The town, or what was left of it, was a ghostly sight. Rotting wooden cabins leaned precariously against the weight of time, their windows like hollow eyes staring into the abyss. As night fell, a dense fog rolled in, enveloping the group in a damp chill. The friends decided to camp near the largest cabin, its roof partially intact. They built a fire, its flickering light casting long shadows across the decaying structures. Mia couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Her unease grew when she thought she saw movement among the trees, a flicker of shadow that disappeared as quickly as it came. She dismissed it as a trick of the light, but her heart remained heavy with dread. "Did you hear that?" Ella whispered, breaking the fragile silence. The group froze, listening. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly, the sound came, a low, almost melodic whisper that seemed to emanate from the forest. "It's just the wind," Jake said, though his voice trembled. But the whispers didn't fade. They grew louder, more distinct, as if a dozen voices were murmuring just out of sight. The friends huddled closer to the fire, their laughter from earlier replaced by uneasy glances and hushed voices. As the hours stretched into the dead of night, The forest came alive with unsettling sounds. Twigs snapped, leaves rustled, and the whispers transformed into guttural murmurs. Riley, ever the skeptic, decided to investigate. "It's probably just animals," he said, grabbing a flashlight. "I don't go alone," Ella pleaded, but Riley waved her off. Minutes passed after Riley disappeared into the fog, and the group grew increasingly anxious. When he finally returned, his face was pale, and his hands trembled. I think we should leave," he stammered. "What did you see?" Jake pressed, but Riley only shook his head. That night, none of them slept. The whispers surrounded their camp, now interspersed with distant cries and ghostly laughter. By morning, the fog had thickened, reducing visibility to mere feet. The group packed up hurriedly, eager to leave the cursed place. But as they retraced their steps, the trail seemed unfamiliar. The carvings on the trees had changed, the symbols more elaborate and sinister. Panic set in as they realized they were walking in circles. Every path led them back to Whispering Hollow. "This isn't possible," Mia whispered, tears streaming down her face. The whispers grew louder, now accompanied by fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures between the trees. Jake, desperate to save his friends, suggested splitting up to cover more ground. Despite Mia's protests, they reluctantly agreed, promising to meet back at the clearing in an hour. Ella and Mia stayed together, their bond unspoken but strong. As they wandered, the forest seemed to close in around them, the trees twisting into grotesque shapes. When they stumbled upon a clearing, they found Riley's flashlight lying in the dirt, its beam pointing toward a crude wooden totem. Ella bent down to examine it, only to recoil in horror. The totem was adorned with tufts of hair and fragments of bone. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar, and the girls ran blindly through the forest, the shadows pursuing them. Meanwhile, Jake found himself alone in a part of the forest he didn't recognize. The air was suffocating, the whispers now speaking his name. When he turned around, he came face to face with a figure draped in tattered miner's clothes, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "What do you want?" Jake screamed, but the figure only raised a hand, pointing toward the heart of the forest. By the time the friends regrouped, they were frantic and exhausted. The whispers had transformed into cries of anguish, and the shadows now had formed twisted, humanoid figures with unnatural movements. "We have to find the main trail," Jake said, his voice firm despite the terror in his eyes. As they moved, the forest resisted them. Branches clawed at their skin, roots tripped them, and the ground seemed to shift beneath their feet. Finally, they broke through the tree line, stumbling onto a dirt road. But their relief was short-lived. Standing at the edge of the forest was the same figure Jake had seen, now joined by dozens of others. The friends ran without looking back, the echoes of the whispers chasing them. They didn't stop until they reached their car, parked miles away. As they sped down the empty highway, the whispers faded, but the trauma remained etched in their minds. Years later, none of them would speak of that night. Riley dropped out of college, haunted by nightmares. Ella moved far from South Dakota, unable to bear the sight of forests. Mia became withdrawn, plagued by the feeling of being watched. Jake, once their fearless leader, disappeared entirely, his final message a cryptic note, "The Hollow calls." Whispering Hollow remained untouched, a relic of the past. But for those who dared to venture too close, the forest still whispered its chilling secrets, promising that no one truly escaped. The four friends escaped the forest, but none of them left unchanged. The whispers followed them in their dreams, the symbols etched into their memories as vividly as they had been carved into the trees. They never spoke of what they saw or what they felt beyond the edge of that cursed trail. It became a shadow in their lives, something they carried but could never fully understand or escape. Years later, one of them returned, driven by a pull they couldn't resist. They were never seen again. Some say the forest claims those who dare to uncover its secrets. Others believe it feeds on fear, drawing people back when they've almost forgotten the way it made them feel. The forest still stands, waiting for the next curious soul to wander too far into its embrace. If you ever find yourself near an unmarked trail, think twice before stepping in. Some paths are meant to remain lost. If you enjoyed this chilling tale, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more terrifying stories. Your support helps us keep the scares coming.